Some truths never burn away.
The photo from the ashes. A Cold Shadows YT investigation. Part 1. The Stolen Children, 30 minutes. Hook opening. The envelope that defied death. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday in 1988, slipped through the mail slot of a house that had learned to live with ghosts. No return address. No postmark that made sense. Just 5 faces staring back from yellowed paper. Faces that should have been ash and bone for 43 years. Margaret Sullivan's hands trembled as she held the image up to the winter light. She knew those eyes. Every mother knows her children's eyes, even when time has carved decades into the faces surrounding them. Even when the world insists those children burned alive on Christmas Eve 1945. But there they stood, David, Michael, Rebecca, Catherine and little Thomas, grown, alive, wearing clothes from an era that proved they'd survived. And on the back, in handwriting that made Margaret's heart stop, "We remember, Mama. Thank you for never forgetting us." Welcome back to Cold Shadows YT, where we investigate the cases that authorities want buried. Tonight's story will shatter everything you think you know about house fires, missing children, and the dark networks that operated in post-war America. Because sometimes the most dangerous criminals aren't the ones who take our children, they're the ones who erase them from existence. Chapter 1. Christmas Eve, 1945, the night innocents burned. Snow fell thick and silent over Blackwood County, Virginia, on Christmas Eve 1945. In the 3-story Victorian house on Cemetery Ridge Road, the Sullivan family prepared for their first peacetime Christmas since the war ended. Margaret Sullivan, her Italian immigrant husband, Vincent, and their 9 children filled the house with the scent of cinnamon cookies and pine needles. The 5 youngest, David and 14, Michael and 12, Rebecca, 10, Catherine, 8, and Thomas, 6, begged to stay up late to catch Santa Claus. At 10:45 p.m., Margaret finally agreed they could sleep on the downstairs sofa. Vincent locked the doors, checked the coal furnace in the basement, and climbed upstairs with Margaret. At 1:17 a.m., an explosion tore through the Christmas silence. Margaret woke to smoke so thick it felt like drowning on dry land. Vincent was already up, screaming the children's names. The older children, Anna, Frank, Joseph, and Louise, stumbled from their second-floor bedrooms, coughing violently. But from downstairs, where David, Michael, Rebecca, Catherine, and Thomas had been sleeping, there was only silence. No screams, no cries for help, no sound of children trying to escape. Children don't die silently in fires. They scream, they run, they bang on walls and windows. The complete absence of sound from 5 healthy children is forensically impossible. Vincent and his 2 oldest sons smashed a 2nd-story window and leapt onto the porch roof, desperately trying to find another way into the inferno. But the 1st floor had become a wall of flame, the heat so intense it melted the snow 50 feet away. Frank ran to call the fire department, but the nearest station was 8 miles away. The fire truck didn't arrive until 2:03 a.m., 46 minutes after the first call. By then the house was a skeleton of charred beams and collapsing walls. When dawn broke, Fire Chief Howard Brennan led his crew through the foundation. They sifted through debris, checked the basement, examined every inch of the ground floor where the 5 youngest children had been sleeping. They found nothing. No bones. No teeth. No belt buckles or shoe eyelets. No trace that 5 human beings had ever existed in that space. The county coroner issued his report within 24 hours. The fire reached temperatures sufficient to completely cremate human remains. The 5 missing children are presumed deceased. But Margaret Sullivan knew something the authorities didn't want to acknowledge. Fires don't work that way. Even crematoriums running at 1,800 degrees for hours leave bones and teeth. Her 5 youngest children hadn't burned to death. They had been taken. Chapter 2. The investigation that never was. The morning after the fire, as Christmas Day dawned cold and grey over the smoking ruins, Margaret stood amid the ashes in the same nightgown she'd fled in, refusing blankets from neighbors who whispered about shock and grief. She wasn't in shock. She was listening to what the silence was trying to tell her. Sheriff Walter Grimshaw arrived at noon on Christmas Day, walked through the ruins for 15 minutes, and declared the case a tragic accident caused by faulty electrical wiring. When Margaret pointed out they had no electricity, the house ran on coal heat and gas lamps, Grimshaw amended his report to coal furnace malfunction. When Vincent showed him the intact furnace, Grimshaw lost patience. "Mrs. Sullivan, I understand your grief, but sometimes we have to accept that terrible accidents happen." But Margaret had been documenting anomalies. The cut phone line, deliberately severed with wire cutters hours before the fire. The missing ladder. Vincent's extension ladder, gone during the fire, found days later in a ravine. The open back door. Despite Vincent locking all doors, the back door stood open, no footprints in the snow. The mysterious visitors. 3 strangers in the weeks before Christmas, an insurance agent, asking about sleeping arrangements, a census taker, documenting each child, a photographer, taking pictures of all 5 youngest children. The warning. A stranger at Vincent's carpentry shop 2 weeks before. "You have beautiful children, Mr. Sullivan. It would be terrible if something happened to them." Grimshaw filed her complaints under grief-induced delusions and closed the case. But Fire Chief Brennan believed her. 3 days after the fire, Brennan came with personal notes not in the official report. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've worked fire scenes where children died. There's always something left. Always. We should have found skull fragments, bones, definitely teeth." He showed her photos. "This fire wasn't hot enough to destroy 5 bodies, not even close." "Then where are my children?" To cover up that 5 children were already gone. Over the following weeks, Margaret began her own investigation. And she discovered something chilling. The Sullivan children weren't the only ones who had vanished from Blackwood County. Chapter 3. The Pattern. Margaret's kitchen table became a command center. She documented every suspicious child disappearance between 1943 and 1945, the Turner twins, March 1943. 8-year-olds vanished following a photographer, declared drowned despite no water at the site. The Morrison girl, July 1943. Disappeared from her locked bedroom. Sheriff ruled runaway. The Blackwood Fire, November 1944. 6 family members, including 4 children, no bodies recovered. The Orphanage Incident, February 1945. 7 children vanished during a field trip. Case closed in 3 days. 13 suspicious disappearances in 2 years, a statistical impossibility for a county of 8,000. Then, Arthur Price, a traveling salesman, knocked on her door. "Mrs. Sullivan, rural families lose children, fires, drownings, runaways. But weeks later, I see kids who look just like them at private institutions hundreds of miles away." He showed her a worn notebook. "I've tracked 47 disappearances. These institutions operate outside oversight. They charge wealthy families enormous sums to adopt children with specific characteristics. You're saying someone is stealing children to sell them? There's a network, and law enforcement is involved." Margaret posed as a wealthy adopter and wrote to institutions price-listed. 3 sent catalogs, actual catalogs, describing available children with prices. One entry made her hands shake. "David M., age 15, excellent manual skills, Dark hair, hazel eyes, small scar on right hand from carpentry accident. Her David had that exact scar. Her children hadn't died. They had been harvested. Chapter 4. The Conspiracy Revealed. Anna Sullivan, working as a courthouse secretary, came to Margaret with a hidden file folder. "Mama, you need to see this, but you can't tell anyone where you got it." The folder contained correspondence between Sheriff Grimshaw and the New Horizon Society, a child welfare charity. Package delivery completed successfully on 12/24/45. 5 units secured before incident. Payment transferred as agreed. Local fire investigation closed per arrangement. Family unlikely to pursue further inquiries. A ledger showed payments to 17 officials. Sheriff Grimshaw received $2,500 on December 26, 1945, 2 years of his salary. "There's more," Anna whispered. "I overheard Grimshaw on the phone about the Sullivan problem. He said you were getting too close, and they might need containment protocols." Margaret and Anna created copies and mailed them to the FBI, State Attorney General, major newspapers, and child welfare reformers. Then Margaret went public. On April 15, 1946, the Richmond Times-Dispatch published, "Mother claims 5 children stolen in fake fire, alleges sheriff conspiracy." Sheriff Grimshaw called her a grief-stricken woman, suffering from delusions. Officials threatened to have her committed. But other families came forward. The Morrisons, the Turners, families from across 3 states with similar stories. Within a month, the FBI opened a formal investigation. The FBI eventually identified a network that had processed over 200 children between 1942 and 1946. But Margaret couldn't wait for official channels. She needed to find her children before the network destroyed all traces of their identities. Chapter 5. The Rememberers. Margaret built a shadow organization. Mothers, former social workers, sympathetic journalists, and disgusted law enforcement officials. They called themselves the Rememberers. Their method: women posed as wealthy adopters, gained access to institutions, documented every child, noting scars, birthmarks, speech patterns. Operating without modern technology, the Rememberers created a handwritten catalogue of over 400 potential trafficking victims. In June 1947, Helen Morrison received a tip about her missing daughter Lucy at Harmony Hills Home for Children in Pennsylvania. Margaret accompanied her. They posed as wealthy sisters seeking to adopt. The administrator, Mrs. Beatrice Thornton, showed them dormitories of silent children in grey uniforms. "These children have been damaged by their pasts. We help them forget and start fresh." In the 3rd dormitory, Helen saw Lucy, now called Laura. When their eyes met, there was a flicker, recognition, fear, desperate hope. "That one seems promising," Helen said steadily. Every word of Laura's background was a lie, but Helen played along, discussing adoption terms, 500, agreeing to return the following week. They left with crucial intelligence. Children were systematically brainwashed to forget their identities, then sold as reformed orphans. Over the next year, the Rememberers documented similar operations in 12 institutions. They found the Turner twins, Emily Blackwood, 3 children from St. Agnes Home, all with fabricated backgrounds. But Margaret still hadn't found her 5. In September 1948, she received a cryptic letter from Kentucky. "Your eldest son remembers the cherry tree in your backyard. He draws it when supervisors aren't watching. A friend." Someone who knew David's true identity was reaching out. Chapter 6. Finding David, Margaret identified 7 institutions near Lexington, Kentucky, specializing in rehabilitating troubled youth. She visited them all. The 4th was Riverside Academy for Boys. Boys aged 8-18 moved in military formation, faces expressionless. Director Colonel Marcus Whitfield ran it like a POW camp. In the carpentry workshop, one boy worked with his back to them. His posture, the way he held tools, exactly like Vincent. "That boy shows promise," Margaret said casually. "That's Lucas. Fire killed his family. Quiet, obedient, excellent craftsman. When they passed the workshop, Margaret saw his hands, a distinctive scar on the right hand, David's scar. Margaret couldn't buy David out without alerting the network. Anna proposed something radical: break him out. On November 15, 1948, during a rainstorm that knocked out power, 3 rememberers entered through old plantation tunnels beneath the property. They woke David gently. "Your mother sent us. Do you remember the cherry tree?" David resisted initially, but when shown a family photograph, something cracked. I remember. They told me it was false memories, but I remember." By morning, David was in a safe house in Ohio, reunited with Margaret after 3 years. David had been systematically abused. He'd internalized the lie that his family was dead. Recovery would take years, but David remembered crucial information. The others are still out there. Michael's somewhere west. The girls were sent to nuns. And Thomas, his voice broke. Thomas was so young. They told him his old name and family were just dreams. End of Part 1. Margaret Sullivan had proven the impossible. Her children hadn't died in the fire. They had been stolen by a vast trafficking network that sold children to wealthy families. She'd exposed the conspiracy, rescued her oldest son David, and built an underground organization fighting back. But 4 of her children remained lost in the network. And with David's escape, the traffickers knew they'd been exposed. They were moving children, destroying records, preparing to make the remaining Sullivan children disappear forever. In Part 2, the desperate race to find Michael, Rebecca, Catherine, and Thomas before it's too late. The rescues that would define the Rememberers. And 43 years later, a mysterious photograph that would reveal the truth Margaret spent her life searching for. Subscribe and hit the notification bell for Part 2 coming next week.